Welcome to the Capital News. I am Alex Karitis. Thank you so much for joining me. Today is October 16th, 2019. Not too much to report on the market front today. Markets were relatively flat, which is so far 2 for 3 days where the markets were relatively just flat for the day. I mean, there was some volatility in positive territory, in negative territory, but they closed down for the day across the board. The Dow Jones Transports was up about 0.5%, but other than that, everything was relatively flat. So we're not going to focus too much today on the market news, although there was some disappointing figures that came out regarding retail sales. The markets, I guess, were anticipating a much stronger figure in the black. It came out in the red, negative 0.3%. Month over month, is the last remaining pillar of any type of strength, quote unquote, I use that loosely, that exists within this economy. Everybody is saying it's the U.S. consumer. Yes, paycheck to paycheck, using credit cards to make ends meet. These individuals, that's who we're talking about here. This is the last pillar because, government spending is through the roof. We got trillion-dollar deficits. No end in sight. Because of the trade war and because of the global slowdown, absent the trade war, this was already going on. Again, the trade war just exacerbates the problem. Your imports and exports are suffering. Your capital expenditures, because of so much uncertainty and because the global economy is so awash in debt, capital expenditures are down. So your last great hope, at least for the U.S. economy, is this supposed resilient consumer who, again, is living paycheck to paycheck, who is using credit cards to make ends meet, paying 20, 30% to do so, for the privilege to do so. So I don't have much faith and confidence, especially given the fact how much debt they already have on their backs as it is. That's a crime in and of itself because of the system that we have adopted here in this country and around the world. It's not doing anybody any favors except those who issue the debt and the credit and get paid all of the interest. And we know who those individuals are, don't we? And institutions, we sure do. So disappointing figures out on the retail trade front. We're still in the very early season of Q3 earnings, so we'll see what transpires tomorrow and later on this week, but the markets were relatively flat. The title of today's podcast is The Geopolitical Circus. I just want to run off a handful of topics. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but just some things that we've been discussing here for quite a while. But sometimes it's nice just to sort of, take a deep breath, take a pause in the action, not really focus on any one thing, and just, sort of see where we are and what's likely going to transpire in the future. So we have Brexit, we have U.S.-China trade war, and a whole host of other issues that we're going to talk about here. We have Syria and Turkey. We have Turkey and Russia, and the reason I bring up Turkey and Russia is because now it's been confirmed that President Erdogan of Turkey is scheduled to meet with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, next week. So that's fantastic. We're going to see, that just smells fishy, doesn't it? Turkey's supposed to be a NATO ally. NATO is supposed to be, it was supposed to be created to sort of fend off Russian aggression. Now you have a member of NATO heading up to Russia. Is he falling back into the warm embrace of Vladimir Putin? Is that what he is attempting to do? Because we know that Russia is very much involved with Syria. And like we said on a podcast maybe about a month and a half ago, we said, is there an alliance taking place between China, Iran, Russia, and Turkey? Well, it appears that just might be true, because we said one of the things to look at in regards to that possible alliance is how these nations are building up their gold reserves. And if they're building up their gold reserves, maybe that is because they all trust that gold has value. Maybe individually speaking, the Chinese wouldn't necessarily trust the Russian ruble, or maybe the Russians wouldn't trust the Turkish lira. But if they're building their gold reserves and it's backed by gold in some form or another, then maybe these four nations can work something out. And if that's the case, the almighty dollar is going to be in a big trouble, because the petrodollar system relies on everybody using the dollar for global commerce. But if you sidestep that, typically you got a big problem. You're going to have the U.S. Marine Corps down your throat very quickly. But now if you have China and Russia, two nuclear powers, with especially with China with a large population. If you have Turkey and Iran involved as well, that's going to cause some hesitancy on the part of the United States to get involved, because the United States loves to go around and throw our weight around when it comes to nations that do not have nuclear weapons. So I went to Afghanistan, you go to Iraq, no problem. Go to Venezuela, no problem. Whole host of others. Understand your history. A lot of it's recent. So there's a lot of shady things that are going on. There's a lot of things that you got to start paying attention to that are not going to make front page news. But that's something to keep in the back of your mind, because it does appear that there is some sort of alliance that is forming between those nations. But we'll see what transpires. Continuing with our list, we have continued noise and volatility coming out of Iran. We still have Venezuela, which remains unsettled. We have central banks who are out of control, but they are out of control because they are trying to gain control of the system and pull all of the levers that they possibly can to juice these markets, to create some type of inflation, which already exists, but according to their numbers, it doesn't. Trying to propel all of the world stock markets to higher highs, and they're just pulling all the stops. This is not a free lunch, folks. We're going to pay for this dearly. You have the continuation in Hong Kong. You have riots and protests in Spain, in Ecuador, in Egypt, in Haiti. How much news coverage are we getting on those? Not much at all. Something is amiss. Something's going on here. And I have a feeling that a lot of this has to do with economic concerns, because people start to riot on empty stomachs. People start to riot when there's income inequality at extremes, and that is exactly what we are witnessing. We also have domestic issues here. We have Congress. We have, we got the geopolitical circus, but we also have basically a first grader fight going on here between 6-year-olds, being Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump. Because what took place today is you have Congress pass, pretty much in a bipartisan manner, a resolution pretty much condemning President Trump and his decision to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. Well, Donald Trump is undoubtedly not happy about this, and the White House called for a bipartisan meeting at the White House. And, of course, Nancy Pelosi was there, along with Chuck Schumer of the Senate and other Democratic leaders. And you now have finger-pointing from both sides, because you had Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, we're told they stormed out of the meeting because they said that Donald Trump was very rude to them. He was basically having a meltdown because he was just so upset with the impeachment and so upset with the outcome of the vote, basically, against his wishes and against his decision to pull U.S. troops from Syria. And then, of course, you have Donald Trump saying, no, I'm not the one that had the meltdown. It's Nancy Pelosi that had the meltdown. See, here's a picture. Look how crazy she looks, yada, yada, yada. So this is what we're dealing with. These are not adults. This is ridiculous. Who do you believe? Because they both lie, like it's their day job. The Democrats, the Republicans, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Donald Trump. They lie like it's their day job. So I don't know who to believe. And that's a true shame in and of itself. And because that's the case, they all, they all got to go. Now, they all got to go. This is not good for the health of this republic, not for a second. So the other thing that we're going to talk about here with Hong Kong, which is also surrounding the U.S.-China trade talks, perhaps, it's hard to sort of decouple them, although it is possible that you can treat them separately. But you have now the United States Congress, and I do agree with this, rightly so, planning a vote to pretty much sort of defend Hong Kong and defend their right to protest and their right to free speech. But the bill goes a little bit further than that. It is basically going to be an annual review by the United States on the autonomy of Hong Kong to see if they can maintain their special trading status that they have with the United States. So if this is basically saying if China comes over to Hong Kong and breaks up these protests or really starts to have a bigger stranglehold on the will of the Hong Kong people, then Hong Kong is going to lose, or perhaps lose, its special trading status. Well, China doesn't like this. And China has already come out and said if the United States passes this bill and Donald Trump signs it, that they're going to retaliate. And I get their side of it too, but they're wrong. The Chinese are wrong on this. because the Chinese Communist Party, they're a bunch of criminals. They're not to be trusted at all, which is the case for most governments. But the Chinese Communist Party is not to be trusted at all. And I can assure you, if the events that are taking place in Hong Kong were taking place in mainland China, we probably never would have heard of this, because China would have quashed this. They would have nipped this in the bud. This would have been dead in the crib. Okay? Western powers, Western media never would have known about it, or definitely would not have been aired. But right now, because you have the westernization of Hong Kong, you have Bloomberg, you have CNN, you have major media outlets that are keeping you updated on an hourly basis as to what's transpiring in Hong Kong. The Chinese Communist Party, I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, do not like that, because they would have put this protest down months ago, especially, again, if this was in mainland China. So, is it possible for the U.S. government and the Chinese government to sort of put these things into separate buckets and to say there's no overlap with a potential U.S.-China trade deal? Of course, it's a bunch of BS anyway, but nevertheless, is it possible? Sure, it's possible for these things to be put into separate buckets. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult to do so, especially with this sort of escalation on behalf of the United States, sort of going after the Chinese Communist Party in this manner to sort of defend Hong Kong, which I agree with. We don't have to go over there with the U.S. Marine Corps and the Air Force and the Navy to prove our point. We don't have to do it. It can be done on a whole host of other ways. We can simply put these types of votes together. We can put these bills together and say, we are the United States of America. These are the principles and values that we believe in. People in Hong Kong are attempting to exercise these rights and these values that we believe in. So we're going to support them in those measures. It doesn't mean we have to send the military over there. We don't have to do it. So this is something that could get heated extremely quickly. It is, of course, something that could very well be overlapped when it comes to the U.S.-China trade discussions, and we'll see what transpires. I'm not holding my breath for any type of trade deal. I mean, I'm not. If you are, you're gonna suffocate yourself, basically. You're gonna pass out. So, I mean, I'm not trusting Donald Trump on any type of great, fantastic Phase 1 deal, because basically we're at Phase 0. You go back to these types of moves, going after Hong Kong, you're basically taking it back a step. I mean, the Chinese are going to say what the Chinese are going to say, which is what they've been doing for the past year and a half, attempting to appease our government, and specifically Donald Trump and the trade negotiators. And say, oh, well, this is what he said. It's sending beautiful letters. Everybody comes over. They give us nice pieces of paper. They shake our hands. They're so pleasant to us over here. And then what happens? Absolutely nothing. And then we smack on, more tariffs. Markets go berserk. And then you have the market manipulation. Oh, everything's okay. There's going to be a trade deal, yada, yada, yada. Well, when is anything going to be signed? Well, if anything is signed, and it's a big if, it's going to be signed in Chile. Because you're going to have another, that Asia-Pacific meeting basically taking place down there. And it's, just a big trading block and all that stuff. So that's where there will be a temporary, or the first signing ceremony, if you will, for some sort of Phase 1 agreement. And again, we have no idea what that means. We have no idea what that means, because Donald Trump just shoots from the hip, just makes this stuff up. There is no Phase 1 deal. There isn't. And when you have these types of actions being taken by our Congress, and again, I think rightly so, this just throws another kink into the mix. So we'll keep you posted and updated on that, but there's a lot of moving parts. Over to our friends across the pond in the UK, this is the same thing. It appears that the negotiators on both sides, the UK and the EU, are starting to take a page out of Donald Trump's playbook in regards to the U.S.-China trade talks to say, well, we have a deal. We're going to talk about a deal. There's going to be a deal. And then somebody comes out shortly thereafter and says, there's no deal. There's no deal. Well, there might be a deal tomorrow. There might be a deal in the next 6 to 8 hours. There's not going to be a deal this evening. I'm not making this stuff up, folks. You can go look it up. Scroll on your Twitter feed, go Google it, just type in Brexit and go down through the news feed. These are the headlines, these are the stories that are coming out. From Germany, from France, from the UK, from the EU officials. This is what's being told. I mean, this sounds like Donald Trump on speed, because this is moving so quickly. Okay? I'm not going to go into great depth here, because it's going to change. It's going to change. I could tell you something right now, And, we do these later in the evening. So within a couple hours, they're going to be up in Europe. There might be a deal. I have no idea. Or they could be so far removed from one. So I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to say anything. All I can say is they are really pushing this down to the wire, which is what we said they would do. The hard deadline is October 31st. That's 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away. And all I can say is if there isn't a deal that is agreed to, not only by Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the UK and his counterparts in the EU, but that it also gets approved through Parliament, UK Parliament, then what's going to happen? Is it basically going to be a hard Brexit, a no-deal Brexit because it couldn't pass UK Parliament? Will they crash out? Or will they actually get something done? That's the hard thing to figure out, because if nothing happens and somehow Brexit gets kicked down the road even further, well, that's another insult to democracy and to the people of the United Kingdom, because they voted 3 years ago to leave. 3 years, and nothing's getting done. So, I think the word circus sums this up beautifully well. Beautifully well. So there was something I just want to mention here before I sign off here that, just like I said, just want to take a deep breath, take a step back from everything, keeping this one a little bit shorter. But I actually, and I hope you guys take the time to sort of watch this video. You can find it on YouTube. I watched it last night, and it was on Real Vision. Real Vision. What they are is basically they're a financial channel on YouTube. They've been around, I think, for a few years, but I think they're really starting to sort of catch their stride, getting a lot more subscribers and that type of stuff. They post a whole bunch of, videos and interviews primarily, and they focus on some of the major players in the investment world. But they also bring in some, political and geopolitical experts as well, and they talk a whole host of things. But they look at things from a macro perspective, which is what I try to do here at the Capital News. But very informative, very interesting interviews. And the one that I watched yesterday was an interview with Kyle Bass, who I think I've mentioned here before, who was a hedge fund manager. His claim to fame was pretty much predicting the subprime crisis back in 08, 09. And now he's really concerned with what's going on in China and Hong Kong, and he's been on this for several years. And he was interviewing a brigadier general of the U.S. Air Force who used to live in China, who speaks Mandarin. He was trained by the Defense Department how to speak Mandarin. He was over there in China for a couple years, and was most recently, I think, the Defense Department's attaché to China on behalf of the United States. And he recently just wrote a book. I believe last name's Spalding, I believe it is. Basically saying that China is eating our lunch while our leaders have been asleep. And some of the things that were stated in this interview, it's about an hour long. I was not aware of all of these things. They honestly don't surprise me, but I'm rather cynical, so not too much does. But my point here is, if you take the time to watch this interview, and again, I hope you do, I don't think that the United States can or should make a trade deal with China, because of the atrocities and the evils that they are discussing that are being perpetrated on people by the Chinese Communist Party is reminiscent of Nazi Germany. And I'm not kidding. I'm not being hyperbolic here, according to what they say, and I happen to believe them, because that's their credibility on the line. These are serious allegations. To say, when you're talking about the Uyghurs, which is basically the Muslim sect in China right now, they're basically in, what do you call them, re-education camps? They're concentration camps for all intents and purposes. There's crematoriums right next to them, very much like Nazi Germany in the concentration camps. These individuals, their DNA is extracted. They are named and numbered, just like they were numbered in Nazi concentration camps. And the reason they have their DNA is because there is actually live human organ harvesting. And I'm not making this up. This is what they say. So, we are trading with a government, and we have people in this country who are drooling, foaming at the mouth trying to get into China. This is what we just talked about yesterday, with there basically being no soul left in the United States of America, or anywhere else for that matter. Because why? Well, you have 1.4 billion Chinese, and they're starting to get paid. And we want some of that money. Doesn't matter that they're trampling on people's rights. Doesn't matter that they are committing these atrocities with people in concentration camps, selling their organs to the highest bidder. Makes no sense. It makes no difference that this is 1984, that this is George Orwellian here. Okay, in live action, people saying, well, we can never let this happen again in regards to World War II and what happened in Nazi Germany. But now it's happening in the Chinese Communist Party in China. And everybody's just waiting to get in. You can't have this type. You just cannot have this. You cannot have this. There is no humanity left. And people were just like, well, there's 1.4 billion people, and we want that money. Makes no difference who we have to shake hands with. If that's what they're doing, that's their problem. That's their internal problem. We don't care that they're human organ harvesting. We don't care that they got people in concentration camps. We don't care that it's 1984 Orwellian stuff going on over there. We don't care that they want to put down free speech. We don't care that they want to put down the right to assembly, peaceful assembly and protest. We don't care that they're against the right to have and practice their religion. We don't care. We just want the money. Just give us the money. That's a sick society, and it's global. And the other thing these gentlemen mentioned in this hour-long interview was in regards to, basically, if you have somebody here in the United States, in particular, and they're basically preaching the virtues of China and how remarkable it is, how they've done so much in such a short period of time, chances are they've been bought and paid for by the Chinese Communist Party, which I believe, because if you listen to people in the financial mainstream media, you come across this all the time. People are saying that the Chinese have figured it out. They have the special economic sauce. They figured it out, and that model should be replicated. What did I just tell you? That should be replicated here in the United States or anywhere else? That's ridiculous. So I think it summed it up well pretty much here today, the geopolitical circus. I'll definitely keep you guys updated on that because that's something that needs to be discussed in further detail. But I don't think now, knowing that the United States can or should be doing business with that type of government. We just can't. But you know what the sad thing is? We have a president who's more concerned about the value of the stock market. And in order to make a point and to really do damage to China, our stock market would have to take a hit. So, who do you pick? What are you going to do? Stay diversified, stay vigilant, and stay with the Kapital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.